Welcome to the Commentary Magazine Daily Podcast. Today is Wednesday, February 5th, 2025. I'm John Budhortz, the editor of Commentary Magazine. With me, as always, executive editor Abe Greenwald. Hi, Abe.
Hi, John.
Senior editor Seth Mandel. Hi, Seth.
Hi, John.
And Washington commentary columnist and director of domestic policy studies at the American Enterprise Institute, Matthew Continetti. Hi, Matt.
Hi, John.
My inclination is to begin with jokes because there are so many jokes and funny things that have come out of the last 12 to 15 hours. I think largely the result of the need to release excess tension and energy from shock and awe. Something happened yesterday at around 5 o'clock that has never happened before. A policy is being promulgated that was so not on the radar screens of people who have been following the matter in hand for 75 years that we don't know where to go with it. So we start kind of defaulting to Twitter jokes, but it's no joke that the president of the United States went before the American people and the world at a press conference and announced that the United States would be taking over or taking a position, as he said in a previous moment,
an ownership position
in the Gaza Strip or Gaza. The classic thing people say is, I didn't have that on my bingo card. I mean, there is no bingo card on which the United States taking over Gaza has ever been printed. In 1967, there was a huge fight inside Israel during the triumphant and unexpectedly triumphant march toward victory during the Six-Day War, when a question was raised in the Israeli War Cabinet about whether or not, because it was the quickest route, Israel should go into Gaza to go march down into the Sinai and take over the Sinai from Egypt. And there was a huge fight because the question was, do we want even to set foot in Gaza? From biblical times, when Gaza was the land of the Philistines, Gaza has been nothing but trouble for the Jewish people. Nobody wants Gaza. That's why Gaza became a refugee camp in 1948. Nobody wants Gaza. No one has ever wanted Gaza. No one has wanted Gaza for 3,000 years until Donald Trump came along.
Well, maybe we should just put on our decoder rings and point them at the TV screens and try to maybe make sense of what Trump is saying and where he's coming from and arriving at this remarkable statement. Just one
that
of
would
many.
Be helpful for him too, by the way.
Well, that's why I'm here. I provide a service, John,
yes,
to all who listen.
Yes, you do.
So, what was amazing about the press conference was that it was doubly radical. For weeks now, Trump has been arguing that the Gazan Palestinians should leave Gaza. And he has been calling on the Arab world to accept the Palestinians because, as he says, Gaza, as a result of the war, is virtually uninhabitable. We hear in the mainstream media about all the ruined buildings, all of the problems. So Trump has been saying the Palestinians should leave Gaza. That in itself is radical. Because no American president has suggested this before and kind of called the bluff of the Arab governments who, since the beginning of the conflict, have refused to accept, and I mean the beginning of the conflict, 1948, have refused to accept the Palestinians from Gaza. So then he decided, in classic Trump fashion, let's just go even farther. And he said that his plan is, at the end of this process, America would have some type of role in Gaza. We would take it over. An ownership position, by which I think he means that the Americans would own the new resorts and condos and skyscrapers he's envisioning will rise from Gaza, like, say,
the Riviera of the Middle East,
as he put it, or Dubai,
We're gonna flip Gaza. We're gonna flip Gaza.
And that's his vision. Important to note, there's no real timeline on the vision. And I think the second thing to note is somehow people on social media took from this that American troops would be involved in Gaza. I'm pretty sure he's not saying that either. I think what he's doing here is, one, turning the entire Middle East on its head, which he's done before. And two, he's saying that, the situation is so stupid, the way that it's been working out over the past half century, that rather than say we're going to have some type of Arab consortium come in and run Gaza after the war, America will do it. America will preside over it. And that will be the way to reach an actual enduring peace. Now, I put out my decoding ring. I gave you the explanation. Do I think it's going to happen? No, not really. But it is a pretty a bold and imaginative view of what direction U.S. policy should take and the Middle East should take. And finally, it also is the death knell for the two-state solution. Because there's no way Trump is going to support a two-state solution after he's saying the Palestinians should leave Gaza, and then once they leave, America will rebuild it.
Okay, I think you could make the argument that the only future for a two-state solution, not in the next 4 years, not in the next 8 years, not even in the next 20 years, when will be no two-state solution. Israel cannot make itself party to a two-state solution until this generation of Gazans and Palestinians passes this mortal coil. I mean, it is essentially a kind of reverse story of the Jewish travails and travels through the desert after leaving Egypt. The Gazans, the Palestinians are in no shape, condition, moral, spiritual, technical, juridical, whatever, to be entrusted with this land if Israel is to be safe and survive and not have multiple October 7th. There will be no Palestinian state for at least a generation. But at the end of the generation, if Gaza is rebuilt, if the Palestinians are find themselves in the bracing light of reality in which there is a future for them to be defended, and a world in which they have a stake in which they can be protected and find some pathway to a normal and profitable existence, could there then be peace between Israel and the Palestinians? I think the answer is yes, but that again gets to your no time frame point here. And this is the secret of, you could look at Trump and say he's a chaos agent and a sower of chaos, or you could look at this and say that he has done the equivalent of the ancient parable, or whatever you want to call it, of the Gordian Knot. You have an unsolvable problem, an unbreakable puzzle, and you take your sword and you simply slice it in half. You don't stand there for 75 years trying to unknot a knot that cannot be knotted. You say, that's not a knot, or you say it's a knot. The way to solve it is not to try to unravel it so that you leave the rope intact.
Or you say, it's my knot. And that's basically what you say. It's ours. It's not now.
It's the most beautiful knot you have ever seen.
The most beautiful knot. Seth,
go ahead.
I want to point out that Seth, where we have a precedent for what Trump has done here is two steps. One very small, though it looked huge, and then one much larger. And the very small step that looked huge because of the resistance to it was the moving of the embassy in Israel from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem. Jerusalem being Israel's capital, its declared capital, the home of its government, the home of its parliament, and the United States, like many other countries, simply refused to accept the idea that Jerusalem was Israel's capital and placed its embassy in Tel Aviv. And multiple Congresses and platforms of presidents running for office said that upon taking office, they would move the embassy to Jerusalem, and then did not do it. And Seth, in our pages and elsewhere, would make fun of the idea that the embassy could ever be moved. It was like, it was a cost without a benefit. You couldn't see, why would anyone upset this status quo? It was understood that the embassies were in Tel Aviv. Big deal. Tel Aviv is a 45-minute drive from an hour drive from Jerusalem. It doesn't really matter. It's like it would be like, the embassy would be in, Morristown, New Jersey instead of in Manhattan, or it was in like Middleburg, Virginia, instead of in Washington. Big deal. No.
Well, the main point was that I just wanted them to stop promising it.
Right. They should stop.
It was the
right,
promise.
because it was embarrassing.
The promise is, the idea is, obviously Jerusalem is the capital. It was actually ridiculous that there was a debate over whether the embassy should be in the capital. But it's like, no one's going to do it.
No one's going to do it. And then Trump did it. And Trump did it, and the idea was, the Arab Street's going to go on fire. Oh my God, there are going to be riots everywhere, and thousands of people will die. And there was nothing. And that small move was in part a signal, along with much grander things, including the fact that we tilted decisively toward Israel, and Israel and Saudi Arabia had started making a pretty quiet but very noticeable entente against Iran after the Iran nuclear deal, for the larger prospect of a separate peace system that came to be known as the Abraham Accords. One, I don't think the Abraham Accords would have been possible without moving the embassy, though you might think that that's sort of ridiculous because the embassy is a tiny baby step and the Abraham Accords potentially revolutionary. Nonetheless, that is what happened in Trump's first term. He is looking, as he goes into a second term, at where he succeeded. And what he sees is boldness worked. Boldness worked, and not incrementalism. And our entire policy in the Middle East since 67, when the fact that Israel was going to be there forever, and that Israel was a military power to be reckoned with, and was going to have to be something that we looked at as a major country that we couldn't simply brush off. Since 67, the idea has been that changes there have to be necessarily incremental at best, because it was too incendiary for anything to be changed. And Trump, I think, we don't really know what Trump looked at or how this happened, but you're looking and you're going, well, all these other methods haven't worked. And look at Jake Sullivan and Tony Blinken and Biden and how they screwed everything up. And look at what the Council on Foreign Relations says, and look at what everybody does. The hell with this. We'll take over Gaza. It's a wreck. You know what I know how to do? I know how to clear a development site. That's what I do. That's my business. You know what you do? You take bulldozers and what's more, I've even had to do Superfund cleanup. There's a lot of unexploded armature there. Armature, that's not the word I'm looking for. Ordnance. There's a lot of unexploded ordnance. Someone's got to deal with that. Bulldoze the place, clear the brush, make everything, and then you can start building. You start building foundations, doing this, doing that, doing the other thing. That's why the language that he used all day yesterday was real estate language. It was developers' language. It wasn't the language of international relations.
Ownership position.
Those were his words.
The President of the United States used the words, I see a long-term ownership position.
Yeah. Can I explain?
Can I just jump in for a second?
Yeah.
Because one thing I think we're not fleshing out here, which is, given the potential infeasibility of this undertaking here, and in light of his tariff wars that weren't, why isn't this just a way of saying, I'm going to shock Arab leaders who aren't doing anything into doing something? Because what I'm throwing out...
I think it is. Yeah, I think it absolutely is.
Yeah, but I think...
I wanted to... Seth, just let me fit one quick thought on the real estate front. When he says ownership position, again, we're talking real estate language. That's a very specific thing in real estate language, because it is actually taking back on we're taking Gaza. When people develop large-scale office buildings or office parks or are part of a big development, they often do this in tandem or with 4 or 5 different partners. And somebody builds the office building and somebody else builds the apartment building. And then at the bottom of all these buildings, there is retail. And if you have a condo, the person who develops the condo sells the apartments, and somebody sells the apartments but keeps the retail at the bottom 2 stories as a perpetual, as sort of like his profit, and he will rent out the retail space. So in the end, if you read about why it was so hard for Trump to think about unwinding his real estate business when he became president in 2016, it's because he's got a little bit here. He's got 12% of this. He's got 18% of that. He traded 14% of this, of the underlying ground lease of this building for 11% of the retail in this building. That's how large scale real estate works. It's an agglomeration. It is kind of like every one of these projects is a stock market of its own. You don't own it 100%. You own 14%. Somebody else owns 12. Somebody else owns 18. When he says ownership position, he doesn't mean that the United States is going to own the Gaza Strip. He means he's going in, he's going to put, it's like slapping the word Trump on a building because it's a good marketing ploy, but he only really owns 5% of it.
We'll own the hotels.
Or he'll lease the hotels.
Well, so can I just put this in context
from Trump, and
what we're seeing?
Get 12% of it. Yeah.
The day before this announcement, he signed an executive order instructing the Departments of Treasury and Commerce to begin the groundwork for a United States sovereign wealth fund. And there are many sovereign wealth funds around the world. The United States doesn't have one. We haven't really needed one. The sovereign wealth fund is a huge pool of investments that the government runs. Typically, they're called strategic funds. They're meant to pursue some sort of objective. They often can lead to rents. They can give to the closest we have to a sovereign wealth fund is the Alaska Fund, where every Alaskan gets a piece of the oil profits from Alaska. So Trump laid this out in an executive order. I mean, something as big as a sovereign wealth fund would, to me, my old-fashioned thinking, would require an act of Congress. But he's laying it out. So this is, again, an extension of Trump the businessman. Why does he want the sovereign wealth fund? Well, he thinks, as he said, maybe we can use it to buy TikTok. And Trump the businessman, too, is now into neo-manifest destiny. Since the election, neo-manifest destiny, he's the real estate man, and he's going to have a legacy, and that legacy will be more territory for the United States. Control of the Panama Canal, acquisition of Greenland, Canada as the 51st state, and now Gaza. All of this is, I think, his sense of mission and his redefinition of his role as the president. And looking back, the first term was rather kind of conventional. He was trying to be a conventional president. He couldn't do it because he had no experience. He led this populist movement. He didn't really have any friends in government. This time, he's saying, I'm going to shape the office to me, for me. And that's where you get this electric press conference where just anyone who hasn't seen it should take a moment to look at the various expressions that ran over Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's face over the course of this press conference, because it's kind of, oh, wow, we're really doing this. This is the best thing he could think of.
And he had all his advisors stand up early on in the press conference and wave to the crowd and be applauded, right? He said, Steve Witkoff, you've done a great job, stand up. And then before he asked the first question, he said, JD Vance, JD, stand up.
Well, that's the other role he has, Trump the MC, Trump the television host.
Right, and he said Caroline is here, meaning Caroline Levitt, his press secretary, and he said, yeah, people have been talking about her more than they've been talking about me, whatever. He said to Bibi, look at all the seats you look at all the butts you put in seats. You really bring them out. It was like a pep rally.
Yeah, but I think it's more than that. And again, I don't ascribe to him Machiavellian third order, 3D chess playing. But it meant something that he told JD Vance to stand up at this press conference at which he said the United States is taking an ownership position in Gaza. We all know that in the ideological division inside the administration, to the extent that there is an ideological division, which we can get to. There are two camps in terms of foreign policy. There's a non-interventionist camp, and there is a kind of old line, not even old line, just sort of like from 2000 onward, hawkish post 9/11 camp, right? The hawkish post 9/11 camp is represented the administration by Mike Waltz, theoretically by Marco Rubio, but though he's bending in a lot of ways, by Tom Cotton in the Senate. And then you have the non-interventionist camp, and that is represented by people at the second level, that is Mike Anton at State, and this supposed appointee Michael Domino at Defense, and Elbridge Colby being policy planning at Defense, and JD Vance is thought to be the leading figure in this non-interventionist, I don't care about Ukraine, I don't want to do anything, we shouldn't do anything. And Trump made JD Vance stand up at the press conference where he said, we are taking Gaza. And I don't think that was nothing. I don't think it was just, I think it was, we are all playing from the same hymn. We are all singing from the same hymnal, right?
And because there's no time limit, JD may be the person who has to turn on the lights on the Trump Tower con Unis.
Yeah, exactly. Because
8 years from now, right? Because he could be president at the time.
So I don't think that was nothing. I don't think it was just, hey, everybody stand up. It was, this is my administration. Here's the Treasury Secretary. Here's the Defense Secretary, because Hegseth was there. Here's the National Security Advisor. Rubio wasn't there because he's in South America. And here is the Vice President. Bibi Netanyahu.
Rubio was according to him, Rubio was on the phone listening to them, and therefore he got an introduction the same way everybody else did.
Fair enough. And here is the Prime Minister of Israel, our best friend. I wanted him to come here first. We've done wonderful things together. We're going to do more wonderful things together. I'm not here with the Prime Minister of England. I'm not here with the President of France. I'm not here with the Prime Minister of India.
Or Canada.
Or Mexico or anything. I'm here with this guy who runs this pisher country of 9 million people sitting there in the middle of the Middle East. And he and I are going to wedge world change together.
And now that's a good time to mention the executive orders Trump signed before the press conference, because we have this developing schedule in the White House now where almost every day, practically, since he became president, he signs a series of executive orders. And every other day or so, maybe twice a week, he turns that executive order signing into a rolling press conference. Again, a television show. It's all becoming just this fascinating television show. And during the rolling press conference where he was signing these executive orders, Trump signed orders removing us from the UN Human Rights Council, defunding UNRWA, American contributions to UNRWA, reinstating his maximum pressure campaign against Iran. And then when Peter Doocy of Fox, who's typically the interlocutor in these rolling press conferences in the Oval Office, says, well, Mr. President, what do you think about Iran trying to kill you and other people in your administration? And Trump said, it's a terrible, I'm paraphrasing, but Trump said, it's a terrible, terrible things. But they know that if this were to happen, and it won't happen, but if this were to happen, we would obliterate Iran. I've left instructions.
Yes.
I've left instructions to obliterate Iran. Don't know where. There's a letter somewhere, but you open it up. Yeah. In the case of my
If you're reading this,
it is time to obliterate Iran. And it was just one of many moments during the day yesterday where I burst into laughter and a huge smile just spread across my face. That's how I'm feeling the past 24 hours.
And I have to say, like, that rolling press conference was really wild because I'm not the rolling press conference, the rolling that scene in the Oval.
Oh, yeah.
I went back to rewatch the clips after I watched the press conference with Bibi. And, when he's doing that, when you say rolling, you really mean it. He's got the press around him for everything he's doing. He's just sitting at his desk and people are coming in and out. He wants the press there, right? There was something kind of wild about the way that he kept everybody there, cameras on him, like a reality show in a way even his first term wasn't, where he was just like, the camera's going to follow me everywhere, the people are going to follow me everywhere, and it's all going to rotate around me. And the other thing was that when that UNRWA executive order came in, pulling the U.S. out of funding the Relief and Works Agency and the Human Rights Council, he's sitting at his desk and he's talking to the reporters, and then somebody comes in with a piece of paper. What do you got? Well, Mr. President, based on your directives, we've got this executive order pulling us out of funding these United Nations agencies. Oh yeah, and he takes it and he's sitting there and he's signing his name. He's going, the potential, the UN. The potential was so great. A lot of people disagree with me. But the potential was just incredible. And it didn't happen. It just
didn't work out.
And they got to get their act together. And it's just not happening. And
we might not be in the United Nations by the end of this term. That's my prediction.
This was a sort of like there was something imperious and imperial about it that surpassed the first administration too, which was like, he's like leaning on his Chase sofa or whatever, and they're bringing him grapes to feed him and executive orders to sign.
Okay, so look, if the world if the world as we know needs to be analogized at all times to the Godfather, because the Godfather is, next to the Bible, the greatest work of imaginative. Well, the Bible's not a work of imaginative literature, but is the wisest and sanest work ever.
Guide to politics, certainly.
Right. Yeah, it's since the Prince. So in his first term, Trump was sunny, losing his temper, going to war. Come at him, he comes at you. Yeah. He's going to curb stomp you if you say something nasty about his sister.
No real friends.
No friends. No nothing. Scary. But, the other someone's going to take him out. And they did whatever they could to take him out at the Causeway. Now he's kind of a weird combination of Michael and Vito. Look at his demeanor. Granted, it's only 2 weeks. But look at his demeanor. He's relaxed. He speaks softly for the most part. I don't mean like Brando softly, but he does not yell. He does not get heated. He does not start saying you're a moron.
He said, I don't want to be a wise guy here, but I think America will just take over the Strip after the Palestinians leave.
Yeah.
I don't want to get ahead of my skis.
Right, but then there was, of course, the moment when they said, well, no Arab country is going to take him in. And he said, my offer is nothing. And I would really appreciate it if Egypt and Jordan would pay the $250,000 casino fee. That's what I expect. And of course, what follows from that is, if Egypt and Jordan don't pay the casino fee and take in the Palestinians, that he's going to put 2 dead hookers in the beds of Sisi and the King of Jordan. I mean, I don't know.
I think he'll crash their economies through tariffs.
Well, okay, so I'm using the metaphor, and you're being literal.
Okay, I'm
taking him literally, and you're taking him figuratively.
I'm taking him seriously, and you're taking him literally.
Yes.
I'm just saying that if you're looking for a way of trying to understand what is going on here, it is that he is approaching this. He is doing the as if. The United States is the most powerful country in the world. It is the strongest country in the world. It's the richest country in the world. We're not scared of China. We're not scared of anybody, right? I'm not scared of anybody. So what follows from that logically? Egypt, you're going to take 1 million Gazans. Now, we might say, and I think this is important, you might say, what he's insane. They'll never take them. This is crazy, right? Countries across the world take in hundreds of thousands of refugees every year.
There are millions of Ukrainians throughout Europe.
There are millions of Syrians.
Right.
Right. Europe, but they're not even on the border.
Right.
They came on a boat.
I think Europe might regret that decision, but the Ukrainians.
I'm not saying that they don't
If
regret
Angela
it.
Merkel were still in power, this would be resolvable.
We could do this.
Yeah.
Egypt.
But I mean, how many South Sudanese are in Sudan? How many Rwandans are in Ethiopia? The flow of populations across borders to get away from incredibly crippling crises that's since the world began. Just because Egypt built a wall and said it doesn't want Gazans in, Trump is saying, well, what the hell are they talking about? Look, we're the United States. I'm stopping it. And they're not really refugees, but we took 15 million Mexicans and South Americans in just in the last 3.5 years.
And we basically paid
who
for
the hell
that
are
wall.
you to say you're not going to take them? You're going to take them.
Yeah. Well, that's so.
Why are you exempt?
Part of this is though that he's he's doing something else, which is empowering Arab states. And I think that that's an important part of this too. He's not just pushing them around. When we did we did an issue on Israel's anniversary in 2018, and I wrote a piece for that issue called the Palestinian Authority Loses Its Authority. And this is what I keep thinking of, which was the point of the piece. The point that we made was that for the length of the conflict, the tail had been wagging the dog. The Palestinians had been in control of what people do. Jordan said, I want to formally make peace with you. We can't sign a deal until the Palestinians sign some sort of deal. In Egypt, there was a whole fight Jimmy Carter didn't even want the 79 deal without a Palestinian thing. For the longest time, the Palestinians were able to veto what sovereign nations around them did. The Saudis could be vetoed by the Palestinians, the Saudis. I mean, this was all sort of insane. And what Trump is doing is restoring a sort of proper order. What he's saying to them is, it doesn't really matter if the Palestinians want this or that, because you're actually more powerful than them, and you can decide what you want to do. Egypt, what would you like to be next door to?
I have a slightly different take. And the way I see it is how we view the timeline of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. Obviously, the conflict begins in 1948. Then, for much of the second half of the 20th century, it's an Israeli-Arab conflict, right? But that ends with Camp David, and there's no Arab-Israeli war since Camp David. Then, after Camp David, with Carter and Sadat and Begin, it becomes an Israeli-Palestinian conflict. But remember, the first Intifada in the 1980s was a bunch of people, Palestinians rising up, throwing stones at Israelis. It was a kind of an issue for Israel and Israel's position in the world. The peace process, as we understand it, is an institution created in the post-Cold War era. The peace process began after the first Gulf War, right? That, and then leading to Oslo in 93, when the terrorist Yasser Arafat is brought in as the official government of the Palestinian Authority. What does Trump think about the post-Cold War era?
He thinks it's garbage.
He thinks it's garbage, and it's a loser, and America's been cheated, and it hasn't achieved a damn thing. And so what is he doing? He is blowing it up. He has 4 years in office, and he is tearing it apart. And that means, we're going to threaten these tariffs on Canada and Mexico. And we're going to bully NATO into spending more money. And it means we're going to totally reevaluate this relationship we have with China, which again comes out of that post-Cold War era. And the peace process. The peace process has led nowhere for 30 years. And so he's ended it.
I think that's a brilliant insight. And I think there's another part to it. When I said Egypt won't take the Palestinians and Jordan won't take the Palestinians, and there's something a little bananas about this because other countries don't get to don't get to just say, no, refugees can't come here, or they can, but it's ineffectual, or they do whatever they can. They try to extort money. We, the United States and the West, wanted the Palestinians frozen in Gaza and in the West Bank to put pressure on Israel to create the two-state solution. That was implicit American policy. We did not want the Gazans to leave Gaza. We wanted the Gazans in Gaza so that at every moment, Israel felt the pressure of doing something to deimmiserate them and make their lives better. And the same with the West Bank. Palestine, the Jordan is 70% Palestinian. In 1982, Ronald Reagan, in the form of the Schultz peace plan, said the obvious thing should happen here is that the Palestinian people on the West Bank should become part politically of some kind of confederation with Jordan. Jordan should become the political actor for the Palestinians as we figure out what's going to happen with the territory of the West Bank. And the King Hussein of Jordan said, we're washing our hands of this. We want no part of this. We're not part of your deal, George Shultz. Let Israel handle this. And the United States said, fine, the hell with you, Jordan, whatever. But for 40 years, it has been the implicit policy of the United States that the Palestinians should stay locked down where they are under the conditions that they are in, so that Israel has no choice, ultimately, but to surrender the West Bank and create a two-state solution. And where, Matt, when you said the two-state solution is done, that's where Trump has finished that presumption, which has been implicit. No one's ever said it, but it is very much of a piece with American policy. And indeed, by the way, leftist Israeli policy, or Israeli policy that wants a two-state solution, is things have got to be bad for the Palestinians on the West Bank and in Gaza so that the guilt of the West will incept this state into being and create a new condition that will supposedly solve things. Why did the peace process become a Palestinian? Why was it decided, as you say, in the wake of the Cold War, that the future to peace in the Middle East ran through the creation of a Palestinian state? Because it was decided, again, and so that the onus for this peace had to be on Israel. Because the only way there would be a Palestinian state is if Israel agreed to it, which is what happened at Oslo. Israel agreed to a process by which at the end, the end result would be a Palestinian state. That had to be agreed to by Israel. It was in control of these two territories. And what happened was destruction, war, murder, death, terrorism. And Israel basically, without ultimately giving up on the Palestinian state until relatively recently as a policy aim, had to go along and go forward with
so
this.
Trump,
And what did that do? This is Seth's point. It denied agency to the Arabs. It denied agency to the people who are the brothers and sisters of the Palestinians to do something except give them money. They had to do nothing. It was, the plate was taken from their lips, and other things happened. And Trump is putting it right back on the table. You fix this. These
and
are
Trump,
your people.
right?
You fix it.
And yes, he framed it as a real estate deal, but he also framed it as a humanitarian undertaking. I mean, that was the sort of, to the extent that there was a moral thread going through it, that was it. And he said, Gaza's a hellhole, and it's been a hellhole for decades. So, which is a sort of nod to what you're talking about.
Right. I also think we should mention, Seth, you might actually know the answer to this. There were reports that Trump watched the terror tape yesterday, prior to the press conference, the 45-minute tape of the Hamas atrocities. And we know that Trump is very much affected by what he takes in visually. And so I think watching that video may have been another impetus to this radical idea of, we're going to take things in a very different direction. Because, as he said when he was with Bibi in one of the episodes yesterday, October 7th can never happen again.
Yeah, well, that's what happened with Syria, right? He was Syria. Ultimately, the images from Assad having gassed children right, was pushed him over the edge. He couldn't, he felt he couldn't stand by. But I also think that, Abe's point is key here, which is what happens when you uh, take the Palestinians and their advocates at their word? What happens when they say, this is an open air prison? This is a hellhole. Trump says, okay, I believe you. Let's get you out of there.
Right.
A prison, nobody wants to stay in prison. That's what a prison is. If you're telling me you are in prison, you're telling me get me out of here. I have an idea.
Oh, but wait. That's another one of the interesting aspects of this, that where the ironies are just folding in on themselves. So Gaza, what we heard, I heard John King on CNN say, Trump is talking about forcibly relocating people off their land. Gaza legally is not their land. Gaza is a refugee camp. That would be like saying that the DPs who left Buchenwald and Theresienstadt and Auschwitz and Bergen-Belsen and were relocated to DP camps for a couple of years, often a couple of years, in Italy and elsewhere and in Europe, right? DP camps, displaced persons camps, that when you said, okay, it's time to go to America, they were like, this is our home. We live here. Now, granted, the Gazans have been in Gaza for the Gazans, whatever. They've been there for 75 years. Legally, technically, it's not their land. It was Egyptian. Egypt, Israel won it in a war. The world did not recognize Israeli sovereignty over Gaza. It became a stateless land that is viewed in international law terms as a refugee camp. What do you do? This is what people have been saying for decades now as a matter of logic. What do you do with refugees in refugee camps? You relocate them out of the refugee camp. You don't make the refugee camp a permanent residence, such that John King, who is not an unintelligent person, but mostly knows how to move things from red to blue on a board.
He's very good on the board.
He's very good on the board, but he doesn't understand the board because Gaza is neither red nor blue.
He can circle Gaza with the telestrator and then draw arrows pointing to Jordan and to Egypt. Maybe that would help him understand what's happening.
It's not their historic residence. That's not what Gaza is legally in terms of international law or anything. And now the idea is, Trump, by the way, didn't even say forcible resettlement.
No.
He said they should be moved. He said, what? He said 4, 5, 7, 12, maybe wonderful sites, maybe even one big site, which is kind of funny because that would be like another giant refugee camp somewhere. But he said, we need 1, 4, 5, 7, maybe 12 sites to move them to. And the idea would be, as Seth says, if it's prison, give them someplace nicer to live until we finish reconstructing Gaza.
And leaving the option of coming back. Right.
They can choose to come back, or they can make a beautiful life for themselves somewhere else. That is actually what the logic of the refugee status of the Palestinians living in Gaza is supposed to be. That's the idea of a fourth generation refugee is an oxymoron. It's a logical, there is no such thing. We have been living under this fiction, and again, in the Gordian Knot sense, not that I think that Trump has thought any of this through systematically. He has just cut the bullshit and gone right to the source, which is, this place is a hellhole. Now it's uninhabitable. Everybody's got to be moved off so that we can clean it up, rebuild it, and then the ones who want to come back because it's so nice can all come back, and then we can move forward, because this only happened because these monsters who ran this place, who were supported by 80% of the population, cut through some fences, murdered and injured 5,000 Israelis and caused a war that destroyed Gaza. that Israel did not want, did not seek, and was not pursuing.
May I ask a question? What do you think? I've spent some time puzzling over this since the press conference. If you're Qatar, or if you're Erdogan, or Sisi, and I believe King Abdullah is coming here and going to visit with Trump this week as well, and you're watching this, what are you thinking? I think you're thinking, okay, what should I do next? Right? I mean, publicly, we're going to say this. We oppose this idea, which I believe MBS of Saudi Arabia has already come out and said we don't like this. But you have to think in behind the scenes. Some of these Arab leaders are thinking, maybe we should give a carrot or something, or maybe we should take things a little bit more seriously when Witkoff comes back to the region and says, well, okay, what about phase 2? Because we need the remaining hostages out. And then finally, if you're Iran, what are you thinking as well when Bibi is the first foreign dignitary Trump visits with in the White House? This whole list of executive orders. Trump says the goal of the maximum pressure order is to end the Iranian oil business. And now we have this idea that, well, you know what? You're cut out, Iran. Forget about it. You're not part of the issue. Hamas is going to go away. We're going to move the Palestinians out for a while. Then we're going to rebuild it and turn it into this kind of like, Monaco on the Riviera, where the Americans will have a controlling interest in the wealth. I'd imagine that there are a lot of capitals that are saying, one, he's crazy, but two, what are we going to do next?
Okay, so here's where, and maybe we should sort of transition into the why this could be a catastrophic mistake portion of the discussion. Even though every part of my being says it's not a catastrophic mistake, but I mean, or that it is, you don't make giant shifts in world policy like this and destabilize things.
There are downsides to everything.
Okay, right. Okay. So I am now going to use an analogy that will get people very angry with me, but I'm going to say it. Okay. So why is it that Egypt and Jordan don't want Gazans on their territory or Palestinians on their territory? Cancer cells work. Like if you have a relative who's had cancer and you chemo and radiation, you do this and you do that, you do all these things, and you do all these incredible things. One cell remains. One cell remains, and that cell metastasizes and can reignite the cancer. It's not like, well, we got most of it. We got most of it, and it's all, good. So, that one cell will die off. One cell remains. They look at the people of Gaza, introduce them into the body, introduce them onto their territory, and you are introducing cancer. You are choosing to move, let's say, let me go even more offensive. Leper. It's a leper. You're choosing, this is a diseased death cult culture that is dominated by an educational philosophy that has said that the only way to get ahead in life is to martyr yourself for your cause. They don't want them. They're terrified of having them. They don't want a single one of them on their territory. Every Palestinian who lives in the Persian Gulf, in the Philippines, all over the place, workforces in Dubai, places like that, are the ones who left of their own volition because they were looking and searching for a better life and said, I need a way out of this trap that I'm in, either on the West Bank or in Gaza. They've moved. They're gone. They've left. They left decades ago. They're all over the Far East and the Indian Ocean areas and in the Persian Gulf.
Some are in America.
And some are in America. They were enterprising, and they weren't going to let their lives be destroyed by this perpetual status as a stateless refugee, whatever. Okay, and maybe their lives are really hard. Apparently, it's horrible to work in Dubai. So I'm not saying that they necessarily made the best choice. But voluntarily, electively, many people have left and gone to make better lives elsewhere. They don't want them. And that's where the rubber meets the road, because you're saying, okay, throw Trump a bone.
We'll have to give him something.
But if you're Sisi, do you want 150,000 Gazans on your territory? You've been spending 13 years beating back the Muslim Brotherhood, only to import a different form, a connected form of Arab nationalism onto your lands in the form of this population that you have been bribing to stay where they are with the trucks that you allowed to drive in to build the tunnel city. That was a payoff to keep them inside the gates of Gaza, to have the Hamas keep the Gazans from leaving.
So here's what you might do instead.
Okay.
When the next round of negotiations, you tell the Hamas leadership, you're going to have to go. You're going to have to leave Gaza. We have to give him something to show. So it doesn't, again, the most total picture of what Trump is painting here won't be achieved by this. But I do think it's a way, just as we saw in our episode on Monday, where we were talking all about the tariff war, and then by the time the video appeared on YouTube and our YouTube channel, the tariff war with Mexico and Canada had been delayed a month because the leaders came in and said, okay, well, we'll do this stuff. And he said, fine. I think there might be something that these governments say at the end, we'll exert a little bit more pressure. We'll tell them they have to give Israel answers on the Beavis family or something like that. Something has to happen.
Right.
And it won't mean the whole population transfer, but it will be something like that. If that's the optimum
So the
scenario.
reason I said we needed to move into the sort of the bad news part is they don't want them. They will do everything possible they can to prevent this Trump policy from happening, because they have domestic considerations that say, I can't take these people onto I got enough trouble. I got enough problems. Like, I got my own restive populations. I got my own, issues. Like, I'm the head of the Hashemite Kingdom of Jordan. I've been spending 50 years keeping the Palestinians squashed down so that I can rule as a minority here. That's all I need, is another 500,000 Palestinians here to knock me over, right? So they say no, which is what actually happens with all peace plans. If you want to even look at this as a kind of they just say no. And then Trump says yes, and they say no. And then he says, I'll slap tariffs on you. And in the end, if you're King Abdullah of Jordan, what's better, a tariff or being overthrown and hung upside down and peed on, have your corpse peed on by, when you're dead? Probably a tariff is going to be the
if he didn't throw in the pee. Yeah.
Okay, I'm sorry. I just was thinking about what people do to, people in this position. Okay, so that's number one, is that Trump will hit an immovable object, which is that there is no way that his vision can be actually, even though what I've said is, of course, they should take in refugees. They're not going to take in refugees. Even the visuals of the last 2 weeks. Imagine you're Gutter or you're any of these places and you're watching the scenes of the hostages coming out and being led to the cars to be driven to Israel. And you're seeing those scenes of chaos, and you're seeing how much Hamas is still supported by the people of Gaza. Do you want those people of Gaza coming to your country and still worshiping Hamas?
And we should note, by the way, that there are lots of Gazans in Egypt. Since the beginning of the war, they are the ones who could afford to pay bribes or whatever they needed to get there. So, Egypt basically has taken in what it sees as not the non-economic migrant sort of sector of the population. And what they see now is anybody else that we would be taking in would be importing, actual refugee sort of status. Poor people who couldn't pay their way through. We let the people who could afford to live in Cairo and its environs in already. Now you're just asking us to take the rest.
Okay, so the other question that's been asked to me, and I'll ask to you guys, is what does this mean for the hostages? You're Hamas. You're listening to what just happened yesterday. The United States is saying we're going to empty out Gaza, which of course necessarily means Hamas. If Gaza is emptied out for 10 years, Hamas is gone, right? That's all Hamas is Gaza, or has whatever remains of Hamas is somewhere around Gaza. And you have the hostages. And has the deal been superseded? Is that it? Are the hostages going to now be killed as a kind of punishment for this proposal? That's what people have been emailing me all night, all day. And I say no, because it's still the only leverage they have. But I don't know that for a fact.
Well, I would say, of course, we don't know for a fact, but Trump is proposing this as the post-war plan, right? What has been the criticism all along? Well, Israel and the United States don't have a plan for when the war is over. Well, Trump is saying, here's my plan. And again, it's radical and audacious and may not work, but that is his plan. I don't think the plan supersedes the ceasefire. And in fact, he's proposing it as the negotiations for the second phase of the ceasefire are supposed to begin. So,
and Bibi was still talking about destroying Hamas.
Right. But I'm saying take it from the other angle, right? Bibi said, we are going to finish this war and win this war. He said that yesterday. That means we're going through this phase. We're going to get out the 33, or we're going to get out the remaining hostages that we're supposed to get in this phase, and then we're going to destroy Hamas, and maybe we'll make some kind of a deal where Hamas, lets everybody else out before we destroy them or something like that. I don't quite understand the logic of phases 2 and 3 from the Hamas perspective, because there doesn't seem to be much in the way of anything for Hamas in phases 2 and 3. At least in phase 1, they got prisoners out. I guess in phases 2 and 3, I mean, there's at some point there's a limit to how many prisoners can be let out. By the way, because I think the number is already approaching, I don't know what, like 1,200 or something. So it's not like Israel just has 200,000 people in prison they can let out. But
they can arrest a bunch more if they need.
Yeah, it's like
Hamas requests more than they have. If there's supply and demand, if they they can increase the supply if they need to, I suppose.
Right. Okay. So, but I'm just saying we're in this very weird place where an earthquake has just essentially been detonated, and now it's like, well, Friday, some more hostages are going to come out.
Well, I mean, I think
really?
that it's
okay.
I think that it's a message to Qatar and the mediators, which is, if something happens to those hostages, you're taking 500,000 Gazans. This is like a skin in the game sort of play for him.
Okay.
Hamas is not the lone decision maker here. There is this, obviously he's not threatening Iran with Palestinian refugees and whatever. There's a limit to how he can spread the use of these Palestinians as a sort of dagger hanging over their heads. But I think as a negotiating tactic, it is, this is plan B. Plan B is they all go and they go to you. So the hostages come out, the deal gets finished, there's peace in Gaza. Otherwise, you and Qatar will feel some of the pain of this.
Trump talked nice about Qatar yesterday.
Yeah.
He said, I think they're trying to be helpful. So he is carroting and not sticking, right? He is praising, not attacking.
But this proposal is a stick, is what I'm saying.
Right.
This is like, you can have Steve Witkoff sing hymnals to your country from the White House, or you can have 500,000 Palestinians.
I don't think anyone knows what's going to happen. I'm not sure Trump knows what's going to happen. It's all just one more thing. And today there will be more things, maybe some connected to the Middle East, maybe some not. There was a very good quote that Mark Halperin highlighted the other day, where I forget who was saying it, some consultant or some former member of the first administration said basically, it's not like Trump has a spreadsheet here and is ticking off boxes. Or even in the first term, a lot of it was made of Steve Bannon's whiteboard that he set up in the first. Here are the goals. This source was saying in the New York Times, that's not how Trump works. All he does is he wants to look at the headlines. He wants to judge the headlines. Why did we climb down from the tariff threat on Monday? Sure, Canada and Mexico gave these olive branches, but the market did not look good. And we know Trump looks at the market. So he proposed this thing. It's got everybody talking. It's the lead story of all three major newspapers around the world. The governments are denouncing it. All the people invested in this flawed peace process say, this can never happen. And then he'll see. And then he'll improvise again. And we're just all kind of sitting here watching and commenting and try to make the most of the situation.
Abe, as magazine editors and as people who publish articles on policy and try to analyze policy and then propose innovative solutions on policy, one of the interesting aspects of this and why Trump poses a unique, not only challenge, but opportunity and threat and whatever, is that when you talk about education or you talk about affirmative action or stuff like that, and you get to the point in the argument that you're making where you get to the shoulds, right? And the shoulds are, we shouldn't be educating our children this way. We need to change the way we do it so that they study, they have gratitude for our country. It's something you wrote yesterday. They have gratitude for our country rather than being taught that our country is bad or problematic, as you wrote in their newsletter, or they need to be taught, Latin, because that's the classical way. We need to do X, Y, or Z. And this is something that we do. And I will be totally honest in saying that as we put these sections together at the end of our articles, or that we insist on writers like Matt and Seth putting at the end of our articles, we have absolutely no confidence, faith, or belief that anything that we propose will ever actually be executed.
Well, does that depend on the administration, though? I mean, or
Well, but I mean, I just mean, for example, this in 1984, Charles Murray writes a book in which he says, what we need to do? We have to end welfare. Book Losing Ground makes a sensation. All we're talking about welfare. Welfare is a net negative. We all think it's probably welfare is bad. But I mean, come on, it was a thought experiment. Let's just end welfare. It's never going to happen, but thank God someone's put it on the table so we can actually have a conversation about the costs of welfare. But welfare, and then 12 years later, as it happens, welfare as we know it came to an end. This started in a book published in 1984 and ended up as policy of the United States 12 years later. But that doesn't happen very often. One of the things we're seeing here in this first 2 weeks of the Trump administration is that a lot of these weird ideas that have been flooded, that seem weird, they don't seem weird, they seem absolutely commonsensical to us, like end DEI,
right.
Stop affirmative action, don't let there be trans surgeries for kids under 18. All of these things are facts on the ground in the United States. So you're like, well, you're not going to put the genie back in the bottle. You can't stop a fact on the ground. It's a new reality. You have to live within the new reality. Maybe you can temper it. Maybe you can get people to look at the negative consequences and do it less. That's about as much as you can hope for. And suddenly there is a presidency that is saying no affirmative action, no DEI, no girls and women's sports,
but in a
no
weird
gender
way,
reassignment surgery for anybody under 19, and Gaza depopulated, America takes an ownership position.
But you know what? I think in a weird way, when the change is binary, when you're just saying yes or no to something, you're more likely to see it happen, as opposed to when it's clever, when you're saying, well, we can do some of this and do that, and we take from this, you see, which will then cut down on that and then put that into there. And, those sort of policy recommendations, I think, can sort of get lost in the ether. Yes, this is good. No, this is bad. That works its way into real world policy making.
Well, then you have to implement. Then, of course, when you say no, then the question is, what does no mean, right? Does it mean no in federal hospitals, or can you use federal funding as a lever to impose policy that by executive order on private institutions or something like that? That's where we start getting into the balance of powers problems and all of that. But
I don't think for a second Trump or anyone who advised him on this, if indeed that's how this came about, had sort of read or heard about a proposal. I think this sprouted from his brow.
He didn't hear about it or read about it in a proposal because there is no proposal. I read every single thing written in English on the Middle East. There has not been a proposal to depopulate Gaza, to rebuild it. That doesn't exist. There is no such proposal. When we talk about population transfer, and that is a very loaded term in Israel, it's been a loaded term in Israel since 1948. Gaza has never been an object of the theory of population transfer. In fact, today, supposedly, there is going to be some kind of a conversation about the annexation or partial annexation of the West Bank, Judea and Samaria, as we now are allowed to call it, according to the Senate, according to a resolution of the Senate. That's population transfer. That is Palestinians, Jordan's a Palestinian state, move all the Palestinians from the West Bank across the Jordan River. They can live there in their Palestinian state. The West Bank is the biblical land of Israel. That's Judea and Samaria. That's where the 12 kingdoms were. And that's what we should have. That was Meir Kahane. That is a very radical idea. People in Israel go to jail for proposing this. Literally, it is against the law for politicians in Israel to propose forcible population transfer. But it is an idea in Israel. Gaza was never part of that idea. Yeah, I mean, Meir Kahane, who is the guy who was the population transfer hero in his book on this, said, yes, we should take Gaza too. But in fact, Gaza, like I said at the beginning of the podcast, Israel doesn't want, Israel never wanted Gaza to begin with, and doesn't view, and Gaza wasn't really the biblical land. It was the land of the enemies of Israel. It was the land of the Philistines and stuff like that. Anyway.
I have a Trump question.
Okay.
How does he, or does he have to, sell this to Maga? Right?
I love that.
The guy
he doesn't have to.
He doesn't have to, Seth said.
No.
Based on the initial reaction, doesn't seem like he has to.
And one of the tweets I saw was somebody pointing out that there was a conservative MAGA world person who was sort of delighting in the idea that there was going to be Trump buildings and big gleaming stuff in Gaza, whatever. Somebody else said, people don't understand how great this is. It's going to be American territory. So American laws are going to predominate, and stuff like that. And the comments were, it's amazing how fast you can go from non-intervention to, an actual empire, right? America, the big difference between America and the imperial actors that it has been compared to is that when we went into Iraq, we didn't annex it. We didn't, there was obviously a military governor, yes, that, for the war and stuff like that. Iraq is not ours. The oil that they pump does not immediately come through to our coffers, right?
Well, that was Trump's criticism 8 years ago.
Right. That's right. And that was, a lot of people, I remember Chris Rock, joking about how, he said, if I took over a Waffle House, you better believe that pancakes would be cheaper in my house. But we go into Iraq and the price of oil goes up.
Right.
So but we didn't, that was the whole point. We didn't do those things. We didn't just go and take, and now you see this and you saw it with Greenland too, right? Which was like, well, I don't love just going and taking Greenland, especially if we have to do it with troops, but it's not like the worst thing I've ever heard. I think he has a core of people who are, they're bought in. They're in.
Here's why I think they're bought in.
Okay, why?
Because the most important thing for MAGA is disruption, is overturning the apple cart. is let's just get crazy tonight, right? That's the most important thing. Let's let Elon Musk tear apart the executive branch of government, starting with foreign aid, which is the most unpopular form of of spending. Government spending first, right? So he'll start there. He's not tearing up other things yet, but let's just do it. Trump, what norms, right? Trump's great because he just says whatever he thinks and he doesn't care, right? And here too, it's let's just upset these things. I mean, Panama and Greenland, you can make a geostrategic case for both of those foreign policy fixations because of their ways to counter the rise of China, whether it's in our hemisphere or in the Arctic. And in this case, it's, Trump is doing something that no one's ever thought before. No one ever has cared about before. So that's, great. And I think they understand too, as the White House, and I expect the White House to do more clarification on this. Trump does not mean American troops will be sent to Gaza. That's not what he's talking about.
No, but this is where the danger comes in if we're really actually going to try to suss this out, which is things take unexpected turns and things have unexpected consequences. So let's game this out. So they do what they do, and they're going to depopulate Gaza, and then they're going to start doing the clearance, and they're going to start building things, and then terrorists show up and start blowing up the new buildings in Gaza, right? And start assassinating workers who are building these buildings. And then the question is, who's going to protect them against the terrorists? And that's where the American troops start coming in. First of all, if you're going to do clearance of the sort that we're talking about, you are going to be using American forces because you are likely, if you don't want Israel to do it, to bring in the Army Corps of Engineers. Now, the Army Corps of Engineers is not it's not an active battalion of the U.S. military, but it is in the U.S. military. The U.S. military will be involved. That is who does things like large scale land. That's who has the expertise.
Well, and who, of course, laid that precedent? Who laid the precedent? Biden with the pier.
Right? The 300.
He already got us involved.
Right. Yeah. Okay. I'm just saying that you can see how you can stumble backwards. Into U.S. forces needing to protect people who are implementing this U.S. policy of reconstructing Gaza, and then something really catastrophic happens, and then the worst.
Well, this was Lebanon, right? The worst case scenario here would be very similar to America's intervention in Lebanon in the 1980s, which culminated in the barracks bombing, the death of our Marines, and then our withdrawal from Lebanon.
Well, we didn't have to withdraw. That was a choice. That was
right. There's a choice Reagan made. Right. And I think Trump would make the same. I mean, everything we know about Trump is he doesn't want Americans killed.
Right. But as you say, I'm not even sure this would happen in his term. Like that's the odd part about this. We don't know what the time frame is, but I'm saying you can see how saying, well, American troops will never be involved. Well, I don't think you can say
you never know. Right.
They will never be involved. No. Because you're talking about doing something that's never happened before, where you still have the interests of terrorists who are going to want to.
But that's where Maga, I think, would be too far.
Wouldn't turn on him. Oh, Maga would say that's too far.
Well, I mean, look at what Tucker Carlson would say.
Well, no,
Tucker Carlson's probably going to say this is too far.
Right. Tucker.
Right. I'm saying I'm interested in what Bannon says today.
Right.
But he probably would say it's too far if you're actually going to send Marines there. We don't need to get involved.
I'm saying it's too far to send Marines.
Yeah, me too. I don't want to send anybody. Right.
Say we should send Marines. That's the joke of this is if they start saying, well, this is a neocon fantasy. No neocon said Gaza should be depopulated. Trust me, I am neocon. We never said it. No one ever said it. Like Michael Oren says in 6 Days of War, a critical neocon text about the recent history of the Middle East, arguably the greatest mistake that Israel ever made was in going through Gaza to get to Egypt. If it had not done so, a lot of stuff might have been different, and that was a huge mistake. So this is not a neocon plan. This is out of Athena's head. This is out of Trump's, sprung like Athena from Trump's head. And so it is Trump. Tucker, who has taken this complete turn into rabid, vociferous, nauseating, eliminationist, anti-Semitic conspiracy monstrous theory according to which Israel killed JFK. Oh, he's only asking questions and things like that. Where Tucker goes as the most popular non-Trump voice on the most extreme part of the Maga, whatever, I don't even want to call it right, because that implicates us, and I want no implication here. But whatever it is, the extremism
of
part,
the populist movement. Yeah.
Right, okay, yeah. Where he goes is going to be very instructive.
Yeah. Well, I'm sure he's telling Trump, you don't want
a demonic force,
Yeah.
I now believe, and therefore Trump is somehow giving into the demon.
He told Piers Morgan that Israel's intentionally killing women and children.
The guy who he had on his show, the historian, who he had on his show to talk about how terrible and evil Churchill was a while ago. Remember that? And the wrong guys won World War II or whatever. The whole alternative history of World War II. That guy was all over social media yesterday saying, all right, so the plan is we let Israel destroy territory, and then Americans have to pick up the check. Right. So that's the Tucker world view of this, which is Israel is doing what they want to do, and we're just going to walk after them in the street with a pooper scooper.
That's why Trump said, that's what's interesting about what Trump did here. Because I think, not that I think that's a fair, obviously, I don't think that that's a fair analysis, but the Colin Powell theory that if you broke it, you buy it, right? So Trump is proposing this. He says throughout what he is saying, we're going to have an ownership position here. They're paying for it. All these incredibly rich countries in the Middle East are going to pay for this.
Yeah, we haven't gotten quite into the accounting yet.
But again, let's talk real estate. Can I tell you another New York City real estate story? Two New York City that will explain Trump. One of the great positions to be in if you are a real estate dynasty in America is that you are known for your reliability in being able to complete projects. And this is a huge issue in real estate, which is so wildly speculative. So you have a $100 million site. It costs $250 million to build the building. You've borrowed money to buy the site. You borrow money to buy the steel and stuff like that. There's a real estate reversal. Something happens, Suddenly, you and the banks that you as a developer, you're broke and you can't finish the building. And the bank has to take over and figure out what to do with this half-completed site. And then you're one of these 10 families in America who can be trusted to actually do this, get this disaster off your hands and turn it around, at least make it into something that's not a loss that you can break even on, or, save yourself from like penury. And then you're in the catbird seat and you say, well, I'm not putting any money in and you're going to give me 25%. I'm going to build it. You're paying for everything. And my cost is I'm getting 25 to 50% of the gain. Take it or leave it. I don't have to build. I don't have to finish your building. This is the joy of having become a successful real estate firm, which Trump's firm never was. Trump is the other person. Trump is the person the bank has to take over from and then find somebody to finish the building. Okay? So Trump is basically saying, America, the Middle East has gone broke and the project is quarter completed. Gaza's destroyed. So here's what we're going to do. You're going to pay for the reconstruction of Gaza. You're all a bunch of Arabs. These are Arabs. I don't care about any of them. I don't care who lives there. It's bad, whatever. I don't care. But you pay for it. We'll build it. And then we're going to take an ownership position for zero. That's what we want. That is Trump's vision of the new Middle East and the Gaza that will be the Riviera is America doesn't pay. They pay. And then we get all the profit because we're the ones who can complete the job. Okay? That's real estate analogy number one. Real estate analogy, why does Trump care? Why is he focused on this as a real estate deal? What is it that he likes? And I'm going to tell you a quick story, and that is the story of Television City. Television City is a site in Manhattan between 52nd and 72nd Streets on the far west side of Manhattan. Empty. dead. There were train yards. There were train tracks. Nothing was there for decades. And Trump had this vision of a, like Mo Green. He had a vision. There's a way station there in the middle of nowhere. He saw gleaming towers. He saw television studios for ABC, CBS, and NBC, new spanking sites, office buildings, apartment buildings, television city, right there on the Hudson River. And he didn't get it because he was right. He saw it first, and then everybody else swooped in, kind of took over. He ended up with 3 buildings that had the word Trump on them when all was said and done. And then the buildings voted to take his name off them. You may remember in 2017, people who owned these apartments said they didn't want Trump's name on their building. Okay. This is Television City. He gets to build, finally. It's clear. Nobody else has title to it. Like these other real estate developers who play zero-sum games with him in New York and kept winning, and he kept losing these sites. No one's going to contest with him for his site. Finally, at the age of 80, he will have his masterpiece, his 2.5 miles, 3 miles of beach where he can build the project of his dreams and not pay for it because Qatar is going to pay for it with its sovereign wealth fund. It's his dream come true. It is the fulfillment. It brings everything together. Geopolitics, New York City real estate development, his ritual humiliations over time by banks, and everything.
All of this
involved.
I've been thinking a lot about a line from a Ernest Hemingway novel, The Sun Also Rises. Isn't it pretty to think so? All these things that are happening, it's pretty to think so,
and that's the horror, actually. See, this is where I think ending and crushing morosity would be that we've had this 12, 14, 15 hours of world-altering idea, we've cut the Gordian knot Trump has just cut the Gordian knot of the Middle East. It's not about the peace process. It's not about the suffering. It's not about what Israel needs to do not to kill as many people as it's been killing. And we need to make sure that everyone is stable, and we can't be destabilizing things and all of that. We're in a new vocabulary. Problem is that doesn't often go well, as we know.
When you're in revolutionary times, it's always unclear where you will end up. But maybe just to end, I should make The Sun Also Rises my recommendation of the day. I am a edge millennial Hemingway fan, and The Sun Also Rises was the first Hemingway I read at a pretty young age. I think I was 13 years old, and I didn't understand. I didn't get it at all. I just loved the words. But I've since revisited it several times and I now understand the existentialist message of it. But if you haven't read any Ernest Hemingway, pick one up. That's my recommendation.
You are. And what is the epigraph of that book? You are all a lost generation, right?
That's what Gertrude Stein told him. Yes.
A lost generation. Hopefully that the lost generation of the Gazans will be found as a result of what Trump has done today, and that there is in fact going to be a new path and a creative path forward here. There's no reason not to hope for it, though God knows there are tens of millions, if not hundreds of millions of people who are desperately hoping that it doesn't come to pass, so that Donald Trump is not remembered as one of the great leaders, of in American history, which is what he will be remembered as, if 1/5 of his vision here comes to pass. He will be, in fact, the most transformative president since Reagan, and possibly since the Second World War. So,
I mean, he's already kind of put his mark on history, and it's got. We're only on day 16, as Seth pointed out.
Yes.
So,
yeah. So we'll be back tomorrow. For Matt, Seth, and Abe, I'm John Podhoretz. Keep the candle burning.